Now we have some clues within the file. One of them, friends, is that the objects we have created with CloudWorks, which you see here like a cover, are organic objects, and we can use an extension, yes, for assigning textures to organic objects. We have such a situation. Look, there's something here as well. I made one here. There's one here as well. We need to use the Sketch UV extension when using the objects here. Look, now we're going to do something like this. Normally, we will go to Enscape's own library. We will take any fabric texture from here, friends. What could it be? It could be something you like. What is this? A different color. Look, we have a color like this. It says Japanese. I say Japanese fabric. Import selection. Let it import this, friends. Look, it has arrived here. I say close. Then, by double-clicking, I selected the texture here and applied it with the paint bucket. Friends, look now. As soon as I apply it here, since this surface is inclined, the textures will overlap. Look, the textures have overlapped. But I want to see the symbol here. In other words, I want the texture to be proper. I went to the toolbar from New. I will activate the Sketch UV plugin. Look, it has a very simple usage. Sketch UV, look, this is the plugin. This is our plugin. You press the colorful checkered flag here. Then you go to the model. You right-click. First choose planar. Since this is planar, you select planar as a flat object. Wait a little. It ensures the textures settle. It will become active once it is fully settled. We need to wait a bit. When you right-click, there are box and various other features. For this surface, the planar or box part can be used, but other parts may not be suitable, friends. That's why I'm currently waiting for the texture to settle. There is such a situation with organic surfaces. Look, it settled very large, friends. So almost a single pattern has been placed here. I'm going to the edit section. I will change the part that is 20:1. Look, it has been placed like this. It has been placed quite nicely, friends. You can use such a feature here. Look, something like this has happened, friends. However, it is a bit distorted here. As you can see, there are two types of UV maps. Let me show you. One is Sketch, UV, and the second one, friends, is when you install Vray from the toolbars. When you install the Vray render engine, there are its own tools in the Vray auxiliary tools section. Friends, even though it is in Vray's own render engine, it also works with other models. That's why it's a nice feature. So when you install Vray externally, it comes to this Vray auxiliary tools section. I can't show it right now because it's saving. Let me show you. Once the saving part is done, it also works very efficiently. Look, I'm clicking. It's here. You enter the Vray auxiliary tools menu. Again, select the model. You selected all the surfaces. Look at this part. It says triplanar projection. So it fits perfectly. It fits on the side. Look, you fit it completely, and when we look at the other surface, you will see how successful it is. Let it finish. Let it complete. Let it finish. Assigning texture to this organic surface takes a little time, friends. So, because it calculates, it quickly does the calculation and fits it here. Sometimes SketchUp can also close in such situations. Because the calculation is quite intensive here. Since it's an organic surface, it tries to fit the texture onto the entire surface. Look, it has perfectly fitted the texture. It has fitted very slightly, but it has done it beautifully, friends. Again, if we set the part that says 1 in the edit section to 5, you will see the texture reveal itself more clearly. There are some slight breaks in these parts, but overall, it has done a good job with the texture, friends. This is the process. We can apply the same process to other parts as well. For example, you can do the same process here. If you want to use a different texture here, for instance, I came here. For example, I went to Enscape's own library, and I'm going to the fabric section again, friends. Look, there are various patterns here. These are actually carpet patterns. You can change the pattern of the carpet here. Let's see. Look, there's a checkered pattern. What else is here? I'm checking if there could be leather. So there are very few patterns we can use here. Therefore, something like this could be from the fabrics. I say import selection. It came here. Look, I'm transferring this here again. It kind of resembles a curtain though. Look, a texture like this has appeared, friends, by pressing here as well. I think we couldn't transfer the textures completely. That's why the textures don't appear in some parts. Look, as you can see, you need to select all of them. Yes, it's finished now, but I think the texture looks very small. From here, it either looks small or it looks big. Let's see. Let's make it 20. No. Or let's make it 500. It seems like it didn't even fit properly. So let's select all of them like this and press here again, friends. There can be such problems with these textures. They can overlap with each other, friends. Look, because there's an error in this model, it couldn't complete the model entirely. Well, let's try this, friends. Also, a different texture, a pattern texture, has come here. Look, I'm placing it here as well. Look, this is the surface. It seems like this surface is mixed with each other. I will click here. Yes, it looks like it is as it is now. Now I'm selecting all of them and pressing this part, friends. Let's see how successfully it will do it. Well, in such situations, there can be some problems, as I said, in organic situations. You need to use more than one auxiliary tool, friends. Let it finish and let's see what kind of result will emerge. Yes, it produced a somewhat more successful result in this one, friends. Look, as you can see, I'm selecting the dropper tool from here. From the edit section, let's change the part. That makes it 100 to 20. Let's see how it will look. Yes, the cut here is visible, but it's still not bad. Let's make it 10. So a value like this has been created, friends. A value like this. Of course, the pattern needs to be changed. Or how would it be if I make it 2 from here? It doesn't look very good. I will make it 5. So it becomes a value like this. It actually tried to adjust itself a bit because this texture needed to continue in this way. Look, it has adjusted the texture very nicely here, but when it came here, it changed the direction of the texture, friends. And it changed it in this way. Look, it has split it here. It created a situation like this. Still, it has produced a nice result out of nothing. This is how our texture is. We need to do this with organic textures as well, friends. That's why there is such a fine detail. I wanted to show it to you. Well, when you try to apply texture to curtains or other textures in the future, you will encounter such problems. You can use either Sketch UV or these two commands in the Ray Helper tools if you wish.